I've always wondered what it feels like to be truly loved by your mother. Don't get me wrong, I had a mother who provided for my physical needs and made sure I excelled in school. But emotional warmth? That was reserved exclusively for my younger sister, Rachel. Our family seemed perfect on paper. Dad worked as a senior executive at a consulting firm, Mom managed our beautiful suburban home, and Rachel and I attended the best private school in the district. But it was much more complicated than it seemed at first glance. "Olivia, your math test results are excellent," Mom would say with a cursory glance at my report card, before turning her attention to Rachel's latest finger painting. "Oh, sweetie, look at these colors. You're such a talented artist." I still remember the way she'd spend hours in Rachel's room, helping her arrange her art supplies or listening to her practice singing. Meanwhile, my achievements, straight A's, debate team victories, science fair medals, were acknowledged with nothing more than a distracted nod. Dad was different. James Preston loved both his daughters equally, but his constant business trips and late nights at the office meant we rarely saw him. When he was home, he'd try to make up for lost time. "How's my little lawyer doing?" he'd ask, ruffling my hair as I pored over my homework. "And where's my future Broadway star?" he'd call out to Rachel. But these moments were fleeting, like scattered photographs in an otherwise empty album. The only person who truly saw me was Grandpa William, Dad's father. He and my Grandma Helen lived across town in a beautiful Victorian house that always smelled of pipe tobacco and old books. In my early years, before everything changed, he'd visit regularly. "You're special, Olivia," he'd tell me, his blue eyes twinkling. "Smart as a whip and twice as sharp. Don't let anyone dim your light." But then came that day, I must have been around 7, when I overheard the argument that would change everything. Grandpa and Mom were in the kitchen, their voices rising above the usual household sounds. "You can't keep this up forever, Catherine," Grandpa had said, his usually gentle voice hard as steel. "Stay out of my personal life," Mom had hissed back. "You have no right to interfere." I didn't understand what they were fighting about then. Shortly after, Grandma Helen passed away from a heart attack, and Grandpa stopped coming to our house entirely. One evening, I overheard Mom on the phone with her friend Sandra. "Thank God that arrogant old man finally got the message," she'd said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I'm completely done with his meddling." When I asked about visiting Grandpa, Mom's response was immediate and severe. "If I ever find out you've been to see him, there will be serious consequences, Olivia. Do you understand?" I nodded, fighting back tears, not comprehending why my mother would keep me from the one person who seemed to truly understand me. But I was young, and fear of my mother's punishment kept me in line, at least for a while. The years passed slowly until I turned 16, when I finally found a way to reconnect with Grandpa William. I got a job as a waitress at the Morning Brew, a cozy cafe just a few blocks from his house. It wasn't hard to convince my parents I was working extra shifts. Mom barely paid attention to my schedule anyway, and Dad was too busy with work to notice. "I'll be home late today," I'd say casually over breakfast. "Jenny called in sick, so I'm covering her shift." Mom would just wave her hand dismissively. "Make sure you're keeping your grades up. We don't want this job interfering with your studies." But instead of working those extra shifts, I'd slip away to Grandpa's Victorian house. The first time I knocked on his door, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "Olivia?" His eyes had widened in surprise, then filled with tears. "My God, look at you. You're all grown up." That afternoon turned into countless others. We'd sit in his study, sharing cookies he'd bought specially for my visits, and he'd tell me stories about his youth, about Dad when he was young, about his travels around the world. Sometimes he'd slip me small gifts, a vintage book, a delicate bracelet, a fountain pen. "This was your grandmother's," he said one day, pressing a silver locket into my palm. "She would have wanted you to have it." We never talked about Mom or Rachel during these visits. If I ever mentioned them, his face would darken and he'd quickly change the subject. I learned not to bring them up. When I turned 18 and got accepted to State University, everything changed. Moving into the dorm gave me the freedom I'd craved for so long. During my first week of college, I decided it was time to stop hiding. "Mom," I announced during a weekend visit home, "I've been seeing Grandpa regularly, and I'm going to continue doing so. I'm an adult now, and I get to choose who I want in my life." Mom's face turned red with anger. "After everything I've told you about staying away from him? How dare you go behind my back?" "Catherine," Dad interrupted, looking tired but firm. "Olivia's right. She's an adult now, and William is my father. If she wants to have a relationship with him, that's her choice." Mom stormed out of the room, but I felt lighter than I had in years. Finally, I could visit Grandpa openly, without the weight of secrecy. Our relationship grew even stronger over the next year. I'd visit him between classes, and we'd spend hours talking about everything and nothing. He'd become not just my grandfather, but my closest friend and confidant. That's why his death hit me so hard. It happened suddenly, a massive heart attack while he was working in his garden. One moment he was there, vital and full of life, and the next, gone. I got the call during my morning lecture, and my world stopped spinning. I remember running out of the classroom, barely able to breathe, barely able to think. All those years of secret visits, of stolen moments, of finally being able to love him openly, and now he was gone. The lawyer's office felt suffocating as we all gathered for the reading of Grandpa's will. Mr. Harrison, a silver-haired man who had been Grandpa's attorney for decades, sat behind his mahogany desk, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he prepared to read the document. Dad sat rigid in his chair, his face a mask of grief. Rachel fidgeted nervously beside Mom, who kept shooting me suspicious glances. I stared at my hands, trying to hold myself together. "Shall we begin?" Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and started reading. I wasn't prepared for what came next. None of us were. "I, William Preston, being of sound mind, hereby bequeath all my property and assets to my granddaughter, Olivia Preston." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked up to see everyone staring at me. The inheritance included the Victorian house, his investments, savings, everything. Nearly $1.5 in total. Dad's face showed surprise, but he remained quiet. Rachel's eyes were wide, but she too said nothing. It was Mom who exploded. "This is absolutely outrageous." She shot up from her chair, her face contorted with rage. "How dare he leave everything to her? What about Rachel? What about James? This is completely unfair." "Catherine, please." Dad tried to calm her, but she was beyond reason. "No." She whirled to face me. "You have to share this with your sister. Half of it should go to Rachel, it's only fair. You can't possibly keep all of this for yourself." I sat there, overwhelmed. Of course I cared about Rachel, but this was Grandpa's decision, his last wish. "Mom, Don't you mom me," she snarled. "You manipulated him, didn't you? All those secret visits over the years, you turned him against us." "Mrs. Preston," Mr. Harrison intervened, "the will is legally binding. Your father-in-law was very clear about his wishes." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of legal terms and paperwork. Mom continued to fume, while Dad and Rachel remained silent, though I could see the hurt in their eyes. The next morning, I returned to Mr. Harrison's office alone. I needed to understand more about the will, about possible ways to handle this situation that wouldn't tear my family apart. "Miss Preston," Mr. Harrison said, studying me carefully over his glasses, "there's something else you need to know." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small brass key. "Your grandfather left this for you. It opens the safe in his office. He was very specific about this. He said you'll find answers to all your questions there." I drove to Grandpa's house in a daze, the key feeling impossibly heavy in my pocket. The Victorian house stood silent and empty, dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the windows. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors as I made my way to his office. The safe was hidden behind a painting of the sea. I'd always admired it during our talks, never knowing what secrets lurked behind it. My hand shook as I inserted the key into the lock. Inside, I found two items, a letter addressed to me in Grandpa's familiar handwriting, and a thick manila envelope. "My dearest Olivia," the letter began. I sank into his leather chair, the paper trembling in my hands. "If you're reading this, then I'm no longer here to tell you this in person, something I've wrestled with for years. What I'm about to share will be difficult to read, but you deserve to know the truth about our family." I continued reading, each word hitting me like a physical blow. Grandpa explained how he'd hired a private investigator years ago, driven by suspicions he couldn't ignore. Suspicions about Rachel's paternity. "The evidence was undeniable," he wrote. "Your mother had been having an affair for years with a man named Michael Pearson. But the true shock came when I discovered that Rachel was born from this relationship." My hands were trembling so badly now that I had to put the letter down for a moment. I opened the manila envelope, and dozens of photographs spilled out. There was my mother, years younger, in intimate embraces with a tall, dark-haired man I'd never seen before. Along with the photos were DNA test results, one for me, one for Rachel. The clinical language spelled out what Grandpa had already revealed: I was James Preston's daughter, but Rachel was not his child. The truth hit me like a tidal wave. All those years of coldness, of distance, of obvious favoritism, suddenly everything made horrible sense. Mom couldn't love me because I was the daughter of a man she didn't love. Rachel was her precious child because she was born from her affair with the man she did love. Memories flooded back, Mom's constant criticism of me, her endless praise of Rachel, the way she'd light up when Rachel entered a room while barely acknowledging my presence. It wasn't just favoritism, it was the physical reminder of two very different loves. As I continued reading Grandpa's letter, the full scope of our family tragedy unfolded before my eyes. The argument I'd witnessed as a child suddenly made painful sense. "Your mother blackmailed me that day," Grandpa wrote. "She said that if I told James about her affair and Rachel's true parentage, it would destroy him. She begged me to keep quiet, saying she'd ended the relationship with Michael and wanted to preserve her marriage." My hands trembled as I read about how Grandpa had decided to remain silent, not for my mother's sake, but to protect his son and grandchildren from a truth that would shatter their world. But the weight of this secret had claimed another victim. "Your grandmother Helen," the letter continued, "had always been sensitive to family matters, and her heart condition made her vulnerable. When she discovered Catherine's betrayal, the shock was too much for her. She died of a heart attack that same night. This is something I could never forgive your mother for." Tears blurred my vision as I read about Grandma's death. I remembered her warm smile, her gentle hands, the way she'd brush my hair while humming old lullabies. Her death had always seemed sudden, but now I understood the tragic truth behind it. "My dearest Olivia," Grandpa's letter went on, "I'm leaving you my entire fortune not only because I love you deeply, but because you are truly my own blood. You are James's daughter, a true Preston, and I know you will handle this inheritance with wisdom and grace. However, I want you to know that you have complete freedom to share this money as you see fit. My only wish is that you use this truth to bring justice to our family, in whatever way you deem right." The letter ended with a final apology for burdening me with such a heavy truth, but I knew there was no turning back now. After a sleepless night spent processing everything I'd learned, I made my decision. The following Saturday, I drove to my parents' house, the envelope of evidence tucked securely in my bag. Mom answered the door with her usual cold demeanor, but this time it didn't hurt like it used to. Now I understood why she'd never been able to love me properly. "We need to talk," I said firmly, following her into the living room where I'd spent so many years trying to win her approval. "There's nothing to talk about," she snapped. "You need to share the inheritance with Rachel, or I'll take legal action. You can't keep all of it for yourself." I took a deep breath. "I know everything, Mom. About Rachel's real father. About your affair with Michael Pearson. About how Grandma died." The color drained from her face, but she quickly recovered. "What ridiculous nonsense are you talking about?" "Grandpa hired a private investigator," I continued, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. I have the photos, the DNA tests, everything. And I'm willing to share the inheritance with Rachel, but on one condition: you need to tell Dad and Rachel the truth. Mom's face contorted with rage. How dare you try to blackmail me? Do you think I'd risk losing my marriage and my relationship with Rachel just because you're threatening me? Go ahead, try to destroy me. I'll make sure everyone knows what a greedy, manipulative person you really are. Nobody will believe you anyway. They'll believe the DNA tests, I said quietly. Get out of my house, she screamed. And don't think for a moment that I won't fight back. I'll destroy your reputation before you can destroy my life. That evening, as I sat in my dorm room trying to process our confrontation, my phone started buzzing with notifications. When I opened Facebook, my heart dropped. Mom had posted a lengthy status update about me, and it was already gathering attention. I never thought I'd have to write this, her post began, but I need to warn everyone about the cruel and manipulative behavior of my own daughter. Olivia has shown her true colors by turning my father-in-law against our entire family in his final years, manipulating him into leaving her everything in his will. She's refusing to share anything with her innocent sister, showing just how greedy and heartless she's become. The post went on, painting me as a master manipulator who had somehow brainwashed Grandpa. She secretly visited him for years, poisoning his mind against us, all for money. Now she's trying to tear our family apart with ridiculous accusations and lies. This is not the daughter we raised. My hands shook as I scrolled through the comments. Aunt Sarah, I always knew there was something off about that girl. Uncle Robert, disgusting behavior, you and James raised her better than this. My cousin Jennifer, money really does show people's true colors. Even my mother's best friend Sandra chimed in, she's always been a difficult child, Catherine. Now everyone can see what you've had to deal with. The shares kept multiplying. Relatives I hadn't seen in years were weighing in, each comment more vicious than the last. Mercenary, selfish, money-grubbing, she should be ashamed. Family friends I'd known since childhood were suddenly experts on my character, all agreeing that I was a manipulative gold digger who had somehow managed to trick a sharp-minded man like Grandpa William. I closed my laptop and lay back on my bed, staring at the ceiling. Mom thought she was destroying me with this public shaming, but all she'd done was make my decision easier. After 3 days of careful planning, I picked up my phone and called home. Mom answered on the second ring. What do you want? Her voice was cold. I've been thinking, I said, keeping my voice steady. Maybe you're right. Maybe we need to talk this through as a family. I'd like to come home for dinner, try to make peace. Just the four of us. How about this Saturday? I'll come early and help you cook. Saturday works, she said, her voice notably warmer. I'll make your favorite lasagna. Perfect, I said, allowing a small smile to play across my lips. I'm looking forward to clearing everything up. After hanging up, I walked to my desk and opened Grandpa's envelope. Everything I needed was right here. Mom thought she'd won this round with her social media attack, but she had no idea what was coming. Saturday's dinner would change everything, and this time I would be the one in control of the narrative. Saturday evening arrived with a heavy tension in the air, though I was the only one who knew what was coming. Mom had indeed made lasagna, and the familiar scent filled our dining room with an almost cruel sense of normalcy. We sat around the table, Dad at the head, Mom to his right, Rachel beside her, and me across from them. Before we eat, I said, setting down my fork, I'd like to say something. Mom's smile was triumphant as she reached for her wine glass. Of course, dear. I've done a lot of thinking, I began, watching her carefully. About family, about fairness, about what Grandpa would have wanted. I paused, noting how Mom's smile widened. I've decided that the inheritance should be split equally between Rachel and me. Oh, Olivia, Mom exclaimed, practically glowing with satisfaction. I'm so proud of you for making the right decision. I knew you'd eventually see reason and do the honorable thing. Rachel gave me a tentative smile, while Dad nodded approvingly. You know, Mom continued, clearly unable to resist the moment, this shows real maturity. I'm glad you finally felt ashamed of your earlier behavior and came to your senses. I let her words hang in the air for a moment, a slight smile playing on my lips. Her victory speech made what was coming next even more poetic. Actually, I said softly, there's something else everyone needs to hear. I reached into my bag and pulled out Grandpa's letter. There's a reason Grandpa left everything to me, and it's time you all knew what it was. Mom's face went pale. Olivia, don't. But I was already reading. My dearest Olivia, what I'm about to share will be difficult to hear, but you deserve to know the truth about our family. As I read about the private investigator, about Michael Pearson, about the affair, I glanced up occasionally. Mom's eyes were fixed on the tablecloth, her face alternating between ghostly white and burning red. Dad's expression changed from confusion to shock to rage. Rachel's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. The DNA tests confirmed everything, I continued, my voice steady. Rachel is not James's daughter, but the child of your mother's lover. This is absurd. Mom tried to interject, but her voice quavered. I have proof, I said, pulling out the envelope. Photos of you with Michael Pearson. DNA test results. Dad snatched the envelope from my hands, his fingers shaking as he pulled out the contents. The photos spilled across the table, Mom in the arms of a dark-haired man, kissing him, walking with him, dozens of stolen moments captured by the investigator's camera. The DNA results followed, their clinical language confirming everything. How could you? Dad's voice was barely controlled fury. All these years, all these lies. I can explain, Mom sobbed, mascara running down her cheeks. James, please, it wasn't what you think. I was young, I was confused. Confused? Dad roared, standing up so quickly his chair crashed to the floor. You had an affair, got pregnant, passed another man's child off as mine, and you call that confused? Rachel pushed away from the table and ran upstairs. Mom tried to follow her, but Dad blocked her path. Don't you dare, he growled. Don't you dare run after her now. You've done enough damage. Mom remained standing by the table, sobbing and begging for forgiveness. The months following that fateful dinner were a blur of legal meetings and family upheaval. Dad filed for divorce almost immediately, his lawyer citing years of deception as grounds for claiming the majority of their shared assets. Rachel and I met at a quiet cafe a week after the revelation. She hadn't stopped crying since that night. I don't even know who I am anymore, she whispered, staring into her untouched coffee. You're my sister, I said firmly, reaching across the table to take her hand. Maybe not by blood, but by heart. That's never going to change. We spent hours talking that day. I showed her Grandpa's letter again, explaining everything in detail. How he'd discovered the truth, how it had affected Grandma, why he'd kept silent all these years. I want you to have half the inheritance, I told her. Grandpa left that decision to me, and you're my sister, regardless of DNA. Rachel burst into fresh tears, but this time with a smile. True to my word, I split the inheritance equally with Rachel. We used some of the money to help Dad start over. He'd moved into a small apartment and needed to rebuild his life from scratch. The social media storm reversed course dramatically once the truth came out. All those relatives who'd been quick to condemn me suddenly fell silent, then started sending apologetic messages. Olivia, I'm so sorry for what I said, Aunt Sarah wrote. I had no idea what your mother had done. We should have known better than to judge without knowing the full story, Uncle Robert messaged. You showed remarkable strength and dignity through all of this. Even Sandra, Mom's best friend, reached out. I defended Catherine for years, never knowing the pain she caused you. I hope you can forgive my harsh words. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I wonder if I did the right thing. Was it worth tearing our family apart? Was revenge worth the pain it caused Rachel, the destruction of my parents' marriage, the public scandal? But then I remember the years of emotional neglect, the way Mom manipulated everyone around her, the pain she caused Dad with her decades of deception. I think about Grandma Helen, who died because the truth was too much to bear. I remember Grandpa, carrying this burden alone for years, trying to protect everyone until the very end. No, I didn't do this for revenge. I did it for justice, for Dad, who deserved to know the truth about his marriage, for Rachel, who deserved to know her real identity, for Grandma, whose death deserved to be understood, and for Grandpa, who trusted me to set things right. Mom still lives in town, but I haven't spoken to her since that night. Sometimes I see her posts on social media. She's crafted a new narrative about being the victim of a vindictive family, but few believe her anymore. The truth has a way of standing firm against lies, no matter how skillfully crafted. Dad, Rachel, and I have grown closer through all of this. We have weekly dinners together, supporting each other as we continue to heal. Rachel is studying art therapy now, using her own experience to help others deal with family trauma. Dad has started dating again, slowly learning to trust.